So I was recently asked for my E6 podcast about my inspirations and who or what has been the biggest influence on my photography. Well, at first I couldn't really pinpoint anyone or anything that has been a huge influence on my photography. Until that is, I checked my bookshelf and found a certain book. I always wanted to be a landscape photographer. I knew from day one that I would never be a portrait or wedding photographer. I only really photograph things that don't move. This initial love of the landscape has diverged somewhat, however, and over the years I've embraced more than just Mother Nature and have since fallen in love with the more chaotic urban environment too, as well as appreciating the everyday subjects in our lives that can also make for beautiful photographs. In a way, I've started to fall out of love with the landscape, or my appreciation of it has changed, should I say, just as I like to photograph the more ordinary subjects around us. So now I prefer the less glamorous landscape locations too. Therefore, I don't shoot sunrises or sunsets. I don't really go to so-called hotspots anymore. Places where you'll find other photographers is not where I tend to head myself. Of course, I'm not saying these are the wrong places to go and shoot or the wrong things to shoot. This is just my personal taste and what I've decided to capture with my camera. Now, I mentioned Hamnoi in the Lofoten Islands in a previous video. Take a location like Hamnoi on the Lofoten Islands. A beautiful place, I presume, yet it's one of those odd roadside locations that attracts thousands of photographers who want to shoot that view. Yet, almost for that reason alone, has no real appeal for me. Partly then due to the fact you'd never be alone capturing that view. And for me, that view is, a bit too pretty perhaps. I don't do pretty. So my approach has changed over the years, but when I look back, the direction I have taken is still very much influenced by one photographer, and more importantly, one book. Sadly, the book is out of print now, but you'll know the photographer if you are a lover of the landscape, or if you desire each year to win £10,000 from just one of your images. The photographer and book in question then is Charlie Waite and his book, The Making of Landscape Photographs. Purchased in 1992, this book was very much my Bible back in the day. Charlie was at the top of his game and in particular was pretty unique in that his images were mostly captured, not in the rectangular format that most landscape photographers use, but instead captured square with a Hasselblad. Not only could he capture scenes with such style and creativity, but they were captured with the balance and even structure of the square format. In this book then, along with his images, he explained how he used shape and form to control the landscape, how he captured simplicity and allowed chaotic scenes to be captured this way. He talks of the use of light, of course, but also colour, how to include water, make use of buildings in the scene, and how to control and make sense of the big view. Now, there's been many books over the years that have tried to explain all the same techniques in their own way, but none like Charlie first did. I used to pore over the images in this book when I was learning the art of photography, dissecting each one with his words as I sought to incorporate these ideals into my own work. To be honest, I haven't really looked at this book now for perhaps 15 or 20 years, until now. It sat on my bookshelf alongside, well, very few other photo books actually, as I'm not a big collector of these visual monograms. Taking a fresh look, however, at the images in this book has reminded me of his influence on my work. I've adopted my own style, of course, my work a variation of the great masters, but I realise now where my love of the square format came from. Mine may not be created with the beautifully designed Hasselblad camera, but it's always been replicated in my work, whether with a cheap Lubital camera, a plastic fantastic Holga, with Polaroid film, or just shooting in the square format these days using the advantage of mirrorless technology. This book may be out of print now, but of course you can see many of the images on Charlie's Instagram account. You only have to look at some of his classic work like the manger at Uffington or his clouds and hay bales in Wiltshire to see how he views the world. I have tried to capture and emulate one or two of his classics over the years, and of course many photographers will know Charlie from his Rydal water photograph. In this book, this image reveals his use of layers and how the shapes of the surrounding elements drops and leads the eye towards the famous boathouse, the key focal point in this view. I always loved how he revealed that he used a stepladder to capture the scene, a necessity to get height above the foreground reeds. I mean, how many photographers take a stepladder into the landscape with them these days? That's old school for you. His love of France and his capture of the chateaux in the Loire region influenced my own journey to photograph these buildings. I could never capture Chateau Sully as good as the great man himself, but I did my best to capture Chateau Chambord in my own way though. Now you won't find one aurora capture within the pages of this book, and there's only a handful of sunset views. And manipulating the image is simplified to using light, filters, and changing film speed. So this is basic in its essence, but there's a purity in its message. Maybe this is something that has been forgotten amongst landscapers. And I actually got this book signed at one of his talks and did meet him once on a trip to the Lake District. He was leading a photo workshop, a new thing back in the day. I myself was still fine-tuning my craft to be able to offer these at the time. It would be a few years before I had enough experience to impart some knowledge myself onto others. So despite finding my influence from many sources these days, other photographers, books and even movies, this book is where it all started for me. If you can find a good copy secondhand, I urge you to pick one up. It could change the way you look at the landscape from now on. Now if you want to see more of how this book has influenced my photography, then do follow me on my Instagram. And of course, check out my E6 subscription for more inspiration, my own advice and guidance that was no doubt initially discovered within this book and developed into how I see the world. E6 is where I impart my knowledge, and I have several books, ebooks of my own within the subscription or to buy separately that may inspire you too. Now next time I'm going to talk about the things that you're not meant to shoot, that I always shoot, go out of my way to shoot even. What could that be? Well, find out next time.